Hello, welcome to another edition of Homebrew with Pixie Q. Today we're making a mulled Christmas cider, and we're hoping for a fairly high ABV on the cider. So, what do we need to brew it? Let's have a look. Primary ingredient, apple juice. From concentrate, basic stuff, nothing fancy. So, I've actually got two different kinds here. I've got this one from Morrison's, that's the UK supermarket chain, and this one from Asda, that's like the UK version of Walmart. Okay, now one thing that you maybe haven't thought of before if you're making cider, or if you're about to start for the very first time, something to consider is the amount of sugar in your juice, because it's different. You might think juice from one market is going to be the same as juice from another market, but it's not, at least as far as content of sugar is concerned. So, this one here, per 100 millilitres, and remember it's a litre in here, so that's 10 times that. Per 100 millilitres we have 10.3 grams of carbohydrate. The only carb in here is sugar, so essentially it means it's 10.3 grams of sugar per 100 ml. So that means this carton contains 103 grams of sugar. This one contains 11.4, so there's more in here. So this has got 114 grams of sugar. So depending on how strong you want your cider, think about which one you're going to buy. As well as that, I'm going to be adding 300 grams of sugar. Now you can use any sugar you like. I'm using light brown muscovado sugar that you might use in baking, cakes and all that kind of stuff. It's nice and soft, seems to stick together quite well. I've used it before, so that's my extra fermentable. As well as this, I'm going to be using these mulling spices. Now, I know you're going to say, but Ewan, what spices? You need to be specific. Well, whole cinnamon sticks, for definite. And also, I'm pretty sure that's a juniper berry. You see, I just bought mulling spices and they came in these little muslin bags. Now, that's too big to get in the neck of my demijohn, so I've taken it out and put it into a bowl. I'm just going to add these directly to the fermentation vessel. Wherever you are in the world, go to your local market and get some mulling spices. So, whatever your favourite ones are, or whatever the proprietary mix that the market sells, you just get that. Okay, over and above that, going to be using some Yeast Nutrient and some dried active brewing yeast. It's just bog standard stuff. Primarily a wine yeast. Okay, so the first step is to warm a litre of apple juice, not hot, just warm, enough to melt the sugar into the juice. So let's get that done. Okay, so I've put a litre of one of these bad boys into here, along with my 300 gram of sugar, and I'm gently warming it. It's on a very low setting, the hob. Just going to stir this round until the sugar is dissolved fully into the juice. You don't want any grainy bits on the bottom. And at this stage, I'm not going to put any of the spices in. Okay, so the first litre of apple juice has been warmed on the stove with the 300 grams of sugar. So first of all, I'm going to put in the ground and whole mulling spices. In they go. I'm also going to put in my whole cinnamon sticks, 2 of them. Now, I'm going to break them up because getting them out again might be a bit of a nightmare if I just put them in like that. So I'm going to break them in half. There we go. Okay. Now before I pour in the warmed apple juice that contains the sugar, I'm going to put a litre of just the standard apple juice in here first. There we go. It's very important that when you are putting in your warmed apple juice, even if it is just slightly warmed, that you make sure it's not anything over and above 40 degrees Celsius, because this is a glass demijohn. It says on the back, the label on the back says nothing above 40 degrees Celsius, so you need to make sure of that, because you'll weaken it or you might end up breaking it. You don't want that. So that's why I've put the litre of juice in there first. That's entirely room temperature, and it should take away from the heat that I've just put into the apple juice with the sugar in it. Okay, so now I'm going to put in the apple juice that I've warmed up with sugar. Wish me luck. Right, so there we go. Now all that remains is to top up with apple juice and put in the yeast nutrient and the yeast. Okay, now I'm going to put the yeast nutrient in. You're supposed to put in a teaspoon per gallon, so around 1 gallon, and I'm not just going to shove it directly into here. I want to make sure it dissolves properly. So I've put a small amount of apple juice into this glass, and just going to give that a stir to dissolve it. And that'll go in as well. So finally, I'm just going to put the last bit of apple juice in. I'm not going to top this all the way up because I want to leave room for Kreuzen foam. So about half of this. Sorted. Now that's all done, I need to take a temperature reading. So I've got my digital thermometer here, sterilised, and let's see what we've got. Okay, so it's 23.8, which is fine, well within the range that we're looking for. Let's do a hydrometer reading before we put the yeast in. Just going to nick some with my turkey baster. This is all sterilised, so I'm going to put this back in. There's no point in wasting 100 millilitres of this. I've thrown it away. Okay, so I did a hydrometer reading, and the gravity for the amount of sugar that I put in, 300 grams, was 106.4, I believe it was. Which wasn't high enough. It's not high enough for what I want to achieve as far as alcohol content is concerned. So I've put in another 270 grams of white granulated sugar. That brings up the OG to 1082. So that's what we're going to be working with. Now I've got my yeast here, dried active yeast, 1 teaspoon of. Going to shove that in. Right, yeast in. Okay, so that's everything done. It's sitting over there just now. Just put the yeast in, and we'll come back to that in a few hours and we'll have a look at the fermentation. Sweet. It's now 24 hours later. Let's have a look and see how the fermentation's getting on. Okay, so here's the demijohn. Let's move in, have a closer look. Look at that. Look at the fermentation. That is really good. Very strong fermentation. Right, so we'll come back to that. This has been part 1 of the video. Part 2 will be in a couple of weeks' time. See you later.